developing pitching. And so I'm never really too concerned about Atlanta. I mean, I think they have a plethora of arms. Some of these guys who aren't going to be starters are going to end up filling in some of these bullpen roles. I think Atlanta's going to be okay with what they've got. I'm not too worried about their bullpen.
Man, all kinds of technical crap going on here. Turn on your mic, moron. Sorry about the technical delays there at the beginnings. We are now live everywhere else. So, hey, live. We're doing it live. But, you know, in this Atlanta team, again, we're going to await the return of Ronald Acuna Jr. We're going to await the return of Spencer Strider. And we're not talking about nobodies here. Again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show here, you got a Cy Young candidate. You got an MVP candidate. And they're going to need some time to ramp up and everything. But what team in baseball is going to add Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna at the trade deadline this year? The answer to that, if you're wondering, is absolutely nobody. So that, as you break down and as we get closer and closer and closer, and we'll talk about this lineup for the Braves, which we know top to bottom is lethal every single spot they go. But in the general makeup of the National League East, again, everybody wants to talk about the Mets, everybody wants to talk about the Phillies, and everybody just wants to forget about the Braves. The Nationals are another team this year, and I'm not saying, calm down before you jump on me about this. I'm not saying that I think the Nationals are even going to win 81 games, but the Nationals, I think, are going to be kind of a pain in the ass of the upper three teams in the National League East this year. So when you extend out, let's take the view out a little bit here, Mac. We know about the Dodgers. We're going to get to the Dodgers, I believe, on March 25th or something like that. They're the last ones. They're the champs. You got to give the champs respect. But we talk about the NL Central. We don't really know who's a player there. That's a tough division to call. I think there's good reason the Braves have the second best odds right now. According to DraftKings, they have the second best odds to win the World Series. And I think Vegas knows it, but I think the general public perception is, yeah, well, you know, they don't have Acuna and they don't have Strider. They're not going to be without those guys for a long time.
No, and again, I think you said at the beginning, Mike, I mean, this is a team that was so successful last year, and they had all these injuries, and they still got it done. One thing that the Atlanta Braves learned when Acuna had his last surgery is he didn't respond well. They kind of rushed him back a little bit. They're not going to do that this time. I mean, they're going to take it easy. I don't know that we're going to see him in early in the season. I would be surprised if we don't see him maybe like mid-May, early June. I think that's when we'll start to see him. They're going to take their time, especially now. I think even with Murphy going down, I think the Braves learned that a healthy Acuna is going to be what they need. They don't need him at 80% or 70%. They want him at 100%. If that means waiting another 3 or 4 weeks, I think they're going to do that. But you're right. I mean, what a great acquisition, if you will, for the Braves to get, like you said, a Cy Young and an MVP candidate when they're healthy. This is a lineup that has a few holes in it, but other than that, I mean, this is a pretty darn good lineup, like you said, from top to bottom.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dylan Cease as a possible trade target. We've heard his name across a couple of different teams here. Kind of an interesting dynamic here. Who do the Braves open with? In San Diego against Dylan Cease and the Padres. And then they go to Los Angeles after that. When you look at the early part of their schedule, and we're talking about the time without Spencer Strider, without Ronald Acuna, they don't get any breaks. It's Padres, Dodgers. I say that. And then the Marlins are their home opener. But after that, you've got Phillies. And then they're on the road for Tampa and Toronto. Then they get the Twins, the Cardinals. And at the end of the first month, they've also got a series against the Diamondbacks, who are loaded top to bottom at every position. So when we take that wide scope look at the Braves, they're going to have to tread the waters a little bit at the beginning of the year, but they have the depth to do that in the other positions. The pitching is going to be a question. Ian Anderson is the first guy that jumps out to me.
Guys, yeah, I was going to say, Mike, I think there's a couple of guys now that Murphy's out that are going to have to step up. I think the one acquisition that they did make in the offseason is Jurgensen Profar. I think he's going to have – I mean, we talked a little bit about him, he is a person that basically held the Padres together last year. I mean, without him, that Padres team probably fell apart. He doesn't need to do as much with the Braves, but now he does need to do a little bit more with Murphy being out. I think the other one is Jared Kelenic. I mean, here's a guy. I mean, he's a top, like a very, very high draft pick that, you know, the Mets were high on. He just hasn't reached that ability yet. I think the Braves need him to really, really step it up. And they're going to need a little bit more now that Murphy's out. But I think, and especially with Acuna at the beginning, I think he needs to show something, or the Braves may have to look in a different direction.
Yeah, and that's been the knock on Kelenic. And like you said, I mean, can he be consistent? And the other thing the Braves did that kind of went under the radar a little bit, and we're not talking about a guy who's going to be a 40 home run, 100 RBI guy, but Brian De La Cruz from the Marlins last year, a guy that they brought in kind of similar to what they did with Kelenic. Is probably going to platoon with Kelenic in that spot. But when you look at this lineup, it's mind-blowing when you go through it. Projected, Profar, Riley, Olson, Ozuna, Harris, Albies, obviously Murphy's spot in there, Kelenic, and Arcia. Now, granted, whenever we see Acuna, you're going to slide Ronald Acuna Jr. back in there. And now you've got some interesting things. The other thing to remember, and I think some people, when they saw the De La Cruz signing, he does have AAA options. So there is layers to taking the chance that they did on De La Cruz, just like they did with Kelenic. You know, but when it comes down to the Braves and we look at their offense, obviously that 2-3-4 in that lineup is the key. Riley, Olson, Ozuna. However they play around with that is going to be interesting. But let's talk about Matt Olson for a second. 293, 14 homers, 966 OPS. Those were his numbers in the final 56 games. It was everything prior to that really started to kind of derail the Braves a little bit. And they had that rough stretch kind of in the middle of the year. They made the great run late when Olson was hitting, and then they lost Riley. So you've got a healthy Riley, did not need surgery, which is a big thing. An interesting trend here. In 2023 in spring training, and say what you want. Everybody has their own opinion on spring training. I don't watch for stats. I don't watch for a whole lot. I'm more interested to see how managers play around with their lineups in spring training. But in 2023, Matt Olson had 8 homers and 47 at-bats. That's one every 5.9 at-bats for you mathematicians at home. And that year, he led the majors in homers and RBIs. Last year in spring training, 1 homer in 44 at-bats in the spring. And he had his lowest home run total since 2018. If Matt Olson comes out ready to go, he hit a ball the other day. I don't even know if it's landed yet. Might be on its way halfway across the Atlantic Ocean at this point. But if Olson comes out and he hits right away, that takes the Braves to a whole different level. And every team's got that one guy. But Olson and Riley last year, their offensive production fell off the table. Now you can play devil's advocate, which is why we call you the voice of reason on this show. You take Acuna out of the lineup, that's a big bat. You lose some protection. So I like the Profar, Riley, Olson, Ozuna thing. We'll get to Michael Harris in a minute. But that 1 through 3, man, talk about setting the tables. That's almost as good as it gets outside of maybe just the Dodgers.
I mean, this is, again, like we said, an offense that is one of the best offenses, or could be one of the best offenses in baseball. I mean, there's not a lot of wiggle room, especially at that top. And now I think with somebody like a Profar, he extends that lineup just a little bit. The one spot that a lot of people have been kind of, quacking about a little bit with the Braves is their shortstop with Orlando Arcia. He had a really good beginning last year and then just kind of fell apart. That's the one spot where the Braves, and he didn't do very good. He wasn't very good defensively either. So that was one spot that I think a lot of people thought the Braves were going to try to manufacture something in the offseason, and they didn't. I mean, if they can have Arcia play like he did a couple years ago. I mean, remember, he was just an all-star just a couple years ago. Man, if they could have him in that 8-9 spot, even have half the season that he had, I mean, you tell me as a pitcher, where do you take your breath in this lineup? I mean, Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we know how things go in Atlanta in the summertime when it gets hot down there. Man, oh man, this is an absolute monster offense to have to face night in and night out. And we talked about that division. Everyone's kind of Soto to the Mets, blah 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 blah. They didn't do a whole lot about that spot in the middle of the diamond, the Mets. And this is a Braves team that is going to take advantage of teams that can't pitch. I mean, like you said, one of the best lineups probably in baseball.
Yeah, and the other big bopper there when we talked about Matt Olson there, Austin Riley, same thing. Like Riley, first time so the prior 3 years he had 33 home runs or more in the prior 3 years. Last year he only has the 19, and again he missed basically the last month and a half of the season. They thought they were going to be able to get him back before the postseason started. And here's the other mind-blowing thing about the Braves. All their losses last year, you take out Acuna and Strider, just period, let alone the other injuries they had. They still only finished 6 games out of first place in the East. That's how good this team is at just grinding it out and finding ways to win games. And so you mentioned the weather and everything. By the way, Truist Park, easily in my top 5. Was able to go there, see the Giants play the Braves on my 40th birthday. I don't know if that's one that I think we've talked about this. I don't know if Truist has been, if you've hit Truist, you've hit a lot of ballparks. I don't know if you've hit, that's one you got to go to, man. It's a good time there.
It's kind of weird, like I think on my list, like really, I only have like 5 or 6 left, but I've never been to. I mean, it seems like Atlanta's had like 8 stadiums since I've been alive. Fulton County Stadium. They had Turner Stadium. Like it seems like every 5 years they get like a new stadium. I've never been to any of those ones in Atlanta, so I definitely it's on my list. But getting
Turner
back to
Field's still there too.
What?
Turner's still there.
Yeah, I know.
I forgot about it.
I know. It's just crazy. It's just one of those things that, like I said, it seems like every 5 or 6 years they get a new field. But I got to work on that whole Florida, Georgia. I haven't been to any of them. I got to go to Tampa. I haven't been to Tampa either. But I mean,
Tampa's not going to be. Tampa's not.
They don't have a stadium anymore.
Tampa's not going to be in St. Petersburg this year. They'll be in Tampa. What a concept! We'll get to some of those teams in a later spot. What's the biggest question you have going into this season about Atlanta? But the biggest thing that if I gave you $100 right now, would you bet the Braves will win the World Series?
No, would not. And my biggest thing is I as much as I like their pitching, I worry about Chris Sale. I really do. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of weariness from when he was with the Red Sox. I mean, he was great for a couple years. He had some freak injuries last year. It kind of just all worked out for him. I mean, I worry. I mean, you look back. I mean, let's be honest. He's, like I said, 36, but I mean, he's pitched a lot of innings in those years. I mean, he was, remember, a workhorse for the White Sox. He was a workhorse for the Red Sox. I mean, story time again. Here we go. Spring training number 2. I'll never forget.
Time with Mac.
I was with Jonathan. We were down at spring training and we were getting autographs, and Jonathan was there and he had a ball, and this dude just right next to us picked up the ball for Jonathan and signed it. And I'm like, who's this dude that just signed Jonathan's ball? I mean, Chris Sale does not look like a baseball player. I mean, he was like a pole. Like there was nothing to this guy. I was like,
eat a cheeseburger.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is Chris Sale. It's like, and so I always wondered about, his durability. He was so good for so long. And then, like I said, with the Red Sox, he had those couple of seasons of just freak injuries. And like I said, the Braves did a good job of protecting him. But here's the thing, the Braves, I like their depth, but the problem is they're going to have to use their depth in order to get through the first part of this season. And we'll see where that takes them. But winning the division, winning the World Series, 2 different things.
So would you take them with my $100 to win the division, which they are plus 110 to win the National League East? They are the favorites to win the National League East. I've had a few people that have been like, no, the Braves aren't the favorites. Just because the Mets signed Juan Soto doesn't make them the favorites to win the East. Could a
the
lot of
Mets.
us? You could see the Mets winning the East, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, of course, and I mean, I could see the Marlins winning the East. No, not really. I
What the
don't.
hell is wrong with you?
I know. I don't see the Mets either. I just something about it. But I mean, here's the thing. I think we've talked about the fact that the Braves last year, like you said, 6 games out, so many injuries. I mean, what other team besides the Dodgers probably can sustain that many injuries and still be in it? There's not a lot of teams. And I think that's the thing that, as I was putting this together, you really, really look at this team. I think Profar is going to have a really good year again for them. I think he's in a spot where he doesn't have to be the offensive leader on this team. And I think when he doesn't have to be the offensive leader, I think he's going to shine. You have to remember Profar was considered a number 1 prospect as well when he was coming up. So the fact that, he may be, down 5, 5th or 6th. And then I go back to even Orlando Arcia. I mean, he had a rough year, but we have to remember, because of all the injuries last year, he batted 4th and 5th sometimes. He's not a 4th or 5th hitter. So if we can slot him back down to the 8th, 9th spot, again, I think this really extends this lineup. I mean, the Atlanta Braves are going to score some runs. There's no doubt about that. If they can get that pitching squared away and as tight as we think it is, and I still think they have a top 10 bullpen, I can see them winning the East.
Yeah, my biggest question for the Braves comes this way. AJ Smith-Shawver. God, I'm going to butcher that a million times. One of 3
We got to get him a nickname. Let's get him a nickname.
AJSS. He's one of 3 returning starting pitchers, if you will, because I had to dig for this, that had more than 10 starts last year. And granted, with all the injuries, Ray Lopez went down for a little bit. They had to plug and play a lot of things. So when I look at the bottom side of this rotation before Strider comes back, and I think we need to temper expectations on Spencer Strider, that's a big injury he's coming back from. A guy who's also logged a lot of innings and was a massive part of the Braves' success. But when I look at Holmes and Schwellenbach, AJSS and Ian Anderson. Ian Anderson's the guy I keep going back to with the Braves. Yep. 2022, 10 wins, 22 starts. Can he stay healthy enough for the Braves to just kind of extend that a little bit? Can he win 15 games? Because he's got the stuff to do it, but he's got to be able to stay on the field. And I think if you get production out of Ian Anderson specifically, that's going to go a long way to seeing how this Braves team go. My other big question for the Braves, and it's not really a question, is a dude that consistently gets more hits than games played every year. It's Michael Harris. I honestly believe that there's some validity and some worth and value to taking a flyer on a guy like Michael Harris to win the MVP. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to, but when you look at the National League hierarchy, he's got a lot of guys to pass. I think he finally wins a Gold Glove this year. And the dude probably has 170 to 190 hits. I mean, I think a lot of people forget that Michael Harris is an absolute machine when he's on the field. The dude is a ball player. He gets a lot of hits. The big 2, Riley and Olsen. So, yeah, there's a lot of questions on the Braves. But my biggest, that bottom 3 of the rotation. And are we finally going to see Michael Harris fully break through and become the next young superstar, if you will, in Major League Baseball? Because he's got the tools to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting team, and I think the Braves fans should be really, really excited for their season. For me, I think the biggest factor I think is still Jared Kelenic. I think if he has anywhere near an improvement in anything that he does offensively, he's going to help this Braves team. He's going to increase that lineup. He's just one that I really, really circled. I think they kind of are counting on him to have a breakout year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, those of you watching, we appreciate you. Tag your friends, tell your friends. We're doing almost all of the teams live, and then the rest of them will be in short form. You can follow us on all social channels at Mike Arana Show, everything but Snapchat. And I will say it for TJ because he's not here with us today. We're not on Snapchat because we're not 12 and Snapchat sucks. But you can follow us everywhere. Obviously, more content and stuff on our pages. Tomorrow, it'll be the Texas Rangers. It'll be up next on the spring training tour. Can they get back in the mix? Later this week, Wednesday, every Wednesday, as we walk towards opening day, we're going to have double headers. So Wednesday, we're going to jump into the state of Ohio with the Cleveland Guardians and the Cincinnati Reds. On Thursday, the San Diego Padres. And we'll finish the live ones for this week with the Baltimore Orioles. Final thoughts, final prediction from you. One thing on the Atlanta Braves 2025 season.
I think their bullpen is going to be an absolute strength for them. I can see the Atlanta Braves winning the East. I can see the Atlanta Braves getting to the National League Championship Series.
But on March 26th, he'll tell you if he thinks they're going to win the World Series when we do our full season preview show. I have already bet the Braves to win the division at plus 110. I've already bet the Braves to win the National League pennant at plus 750, or to win the World Series at plus 750. I decided I was in too many times on the Braves, so we're going to skip the NL pennant, and I'm going to go for gold there. Does that mean I think the Braves are going to win the World Series? Is that my final pick? No, it's not. Not one bit whatsoever. But for Vegas Mac, for myself, for TJ, who will be with us on Wednesday when we go into the state of Ohio, we thank you for joining us. Again, follow us at Mike Arana Show. Again, for Vegas Mac, the rest of our crew, TJ, we will talk to you tomorrow, and everything's bigger in Texas.